Hi, I'm Skinny Cheeks. We just got another update from the devs, this one responding to a lot of the community's feedback and concerns about the topic of the hybridization of skills. This is the same thread for the combat preview, which I posted a video covering last week. So if you want to see me dive into that letter, make sure to check that video out. I'll have it linked in the description. But to briefly sum it up for those that missed it, they are now going to allow skills, regardless of which resource they cost, to scale with your highest stats. So either stamina and weapon damage or magicka and spell damage. They are also sourcing together buffs like major prophecy and major savagery, the crit chance bonuses, as well as major sorcery and brutality, the spell and weapon damage bonuses. These won't be combined together on potions yet, though they did mention that this is probably coming in a future update, but they are combined on player skills. So one of the big concerns that many people have had with this new system is that instead of having 12 classes, a stamina and a magicka version of each class, we will essentially be squashing that down to 6. I do understand that concern and point of view, but I think this is a bit of an oversimplification of what is going to happen, and I'll explain more about that a bit later in the video. Another concern people have is that many of our morphs for our skills might not be used because there is just going to be a clear winner for most situations, or maybe we'll end up stuck with one morph that will just be the PvP version and the other the PvE morph. So we'll get into that discussion later as well. But I think that's a pretty good summary of where we are going into this. So let's go ahead and get into the dev response from Gilliam on the forums. I'll have this linked down in the description too if you want to read through it. Greetings everyone, we've been closely monitoring the feedback and discussion surrounding the Update 33 combat preview and have taken note of a few reoccurring bits that we would like to take some time to address, particularly regarding the hybridization work we've been working on for the past year and a half, and the next big step of making most abilities scale dynamically when applicable with offensive stats. To reiterate our goal, these passes have been done to help reduce the number of restrictions when engaging with an ability in your class kit or other skill line, helping you create a build that resonates with you based on what a skill offers rather than the stats you've picked. However, we do still believe stats should play an important role in determining effectiveness of skills and how your build comes to life in the game. With the sheer number of them in the game, we found that the previous system of weapon versus spell damage, critical chance, and penetration were severely impeding on one of the core mantras of the game, play the way you want. With other stats such as health, magicka, and stamina, and the recovery of those stats, we feel we have a large area to enforce limits of how often you can utilize skills as a defining factor of identity and build definition, rather than the potency of those skills as well. So pretty much what he is saying here is that you'll still have to be conscious of your skill selection and how that fits into your build, because you need to be able to manage those skills with your resources. So you can't just throw anything on your bar now and it's automatically going to work. However, you won't be limited by the offensive stat you choose to focus into when choosing the skills you want to utilize. All right, let's keep going. One of the main concerns we've seen is how classes will retain their identity moving forward with the new system of dynamic scaling. In our efforts to reduce penalties and restrictions, there always comes an air of homogenization with these changes where more things feel similar in nature. Our goal is never to intentionally hurt strong identities, and we try to avoid it as much as possible while still improving your freedom in creation and expression. We believe that ability costs and how they play into your build will still be a large factor in terms of how frequently you can use abilities. For example, it will be harder for a fully specialized stamina build to run a spammable ability like puncturing sweeps or impale as frequently as a magicka build, unless they start to make decisions that detract from their specialization of stamina-based actions, thus beginning to change their identity. However, reducing the number of builds in the world that focus on specialization is not as problematic, and in fact something we would like to see more of. Moving the concept away from identifying only as magicka or stamina and instead focusing on playstyle such as melee or range, and using skills of varying costs to realize your goals is something we're actively looking forward to. That said, we are aware of the reality that when trying to squeeze out every possible amount of efficiency in a build, there will always be choices that come out ahead, and we accept this reality as long as those choices aren't coming out ahead in almost every situation. Man, this paragraph. Okay, I love this idea of moving the concept away from identifying only as magicka or stamina. To be clear though, this isn't removing those playstyles. If you still want to go a full stamina route and be what was more traditionally a stamina sorcerer, for example, you can absolutely still do that. They didn't remove or nerf any of that playstyle. And then the same with the magicka sorcerer side of that. You can absolutely still do both with great results. But what is likely to happen through all of this is that what ends up being fully optimized, and as Gilliam said, squeezes out every possible amount of efficiency, we will start to see the merging of these two a bit, where some of the best options from both worlds will be picked and utilized. But what is cool is that you can still get close to the same results with many different kinds of configurations, and like he said in the last line there, we accept this reality as long as those choices aren't coming out ahead in almost every situation. And I agree, we don't want to end up with morphs that are just unused across the board. So ideally, our morph choices moving forward will be interesting enough for us to go with different options based on the type of content we're running or our own playstyle preferences. But more about the morphs here in this next paragraph. Another area we've seen quite a bit of feedback on is morph diversity and how the changes to hybridization impact which morph you want to pick. In previous updates, there were pretty clear options. If your ability morphed into a change in cost, it likely also changed in its scaling, leading to relatively binary morph options of just picking whichever ability met your primary resource. So for an example of this, a Stam DK would go with Noxious Breath here, and Mag DK would go with Engulfing Flames. There wasn't really a choice here, you pretty much just went with the one that scaled with your stats. So now the ability's potency is far less impacted by your stats and instead focuses on what it costs and adds in functionality. This will be a vast improvement compared to many of the binary picks of before, where you didn't really have two options if you were a specialized build. But we do still know there are many morphs that don't hold a candle to one another. And I'm really glad he mentioned that last line there. They are aware that some of the morphs need some love. I'm actually going to go through a few of those skills a bit later in this video that I think need the most work right now. But let's continue on. On that note, depending on specialization and the type of play you're focusing on, many morphs will remain rather contextual in nature. Comparing more damage for a specific attack versus gaining an area of effect form of a major debuff may seem like a simple option for a high-end damage dealer, but outside of that context, a compelling choice is still seen. Pretty much what I think he's saying is be open-minded about it too. Just because you don't have much use for the morph doesn't necessarily mean that there isn't a use for it in the game. While this update will conclude much of our hybridization work, aside from the work-in-progress consumable adjustments we mentioned in the original post, we know it will have knock-on effects to the game, and we're dedicated to following through as they pop up and evolve along with the game. Thanks for your time, and we hope this helped give some insight into where our focus has been. So first off, I just want to say thank you for the further communication. I don't know about you all, but I feel like the more communication, the better. Whether I necessarily agree or disagree with what is said, at least with more communication, you can understand the decision-making process a little bit better. I certainly can't speak for all players, but communication like this goes a long way for me. So I've had about a week now to really start to wrap my head around this new update, and for the most part, I'm really enjoying what this new system opens the doors to. That said, and ZOS has acknowledged it too, there are some skills that need some work. So this definitely won't be a comprehensive list of all of those skills, but I did pick out a few abilities that I thought stood out the most as either being extremely lopsided with the morph choice, or maybe one of the morphs just lacking any real identity. So the first one we'll go with here is the Warden's Bear Ultimate. We can choose Eternal Guardian or Wild Guardian. Essentially the morphs are the same, except Eternal Guardian deals magic damage and the Wild Guardian deals physical damage. So when you go to choose the Wild Guardian morph, one of the features that the tooltip says the morph has is that it increases the damage of it. However, this morph is physical and the Eternal Guardian morph is magic damage, and Wardens have a passive that increases their magic damage by 10%. So after this passive increase, the magic version still does more damage than the physical one. So as it is right now, there's really no reason to choose the physical morph. It's less damage and has no secondary effect, while the Magicka morph will auto-revive the bear if it dies in combat. So the quick and easy route would be just to increase the physical one's damage further, maybe add a bleed or something to it, but I don't really love that. The morph options on these two have always felt a little lacking to me, and I'd rather see these two get something more meaningful to distinguish between them. Maybe one morph could be more damage oriented and the other more of a support type of morph, or another possibility would be to have one morph really great for damage and execute DPS like they both currently are, but then the other morph, it could deal reduced damage but allow you to cast other ultimates in combat. So you'd still have a less effective version of your bear at your side, but now you can utilize the full array of ultimates in the game. So just some possible thoughts. Overall, this skill just needs a firm kick in the pants. The next skill we'll go over is the Necromancer Ultimate. The morphs we have here are Pestilent Colossus and the Glacial Colossus. Thank you, Lulu, for bringing this one up in the ESOU Discord. He said, can we get a new damage ultimate for Necromancer? Both morphs do not differentiate from each other well at all, and with the introduction of major vulnerability from an alternate source, they feel lackluster. I'd recommend a ground-placed AoE dot from one of the Colossus morphs to suit the class's 15% dot bonus. I think this is a really good idea. So the damage on these is pretty low, and without them having that unique major vulnerability function, I think they need some love to really stand out in today's game. So the way the morphs are now, the only real differences are a tiny bit more damage out of the Pestilent morph and a stun at the end of the Glacial morph. At their core, they don't really do anything differently though, and the damage difference isn't really enough to make the Pestilent morph stand out. So to piggyback a little bit on what Lulu was saying and add on to it, maybe the Glacial morph after the third slam could drop a Frost AoE for 10 seconds or so that deals decent damage, but also debuffs enemies within it in a more defensive way. So maybe like a major cowardice debuff to reduce weapon and spell damage, or even something unique. And then they could have the Pestilent morph have a 10-second dot attached to it as well that ramps up in damage, similar to how the initial 3 hits ramp up in damage. So you'd have a nice pure offensive morph and then a bit more of a defensive option as well. It would be nice for the offensive one to be more on par with the same damage you'd get from something like a Destro ult. It would be spread out a little longer, but maybe the same overall range of damage, and you get the major vuln with it. I think this would be a really nice thing to add for the class. I mean, even if you took off the major vuln on the more offensive option and gave it to the more defensive option, you'd still have good reason to go with one morph or the other. And I don't think this would be too broken for PvP either, since you do have those 3 upfront slams to react to get out of the area, but it could add a new fun aspect to the skill for PvE and give a little power back to this skill that lost some of its uniqueness. Alright, sticking with Necromancers, let's cover Blast Bones. So Blighted and Stalking Blast Bones have the same tooltip for damage. However, Stalking Blast Bones, the Flame Morph, always deals at least 10% more, even if you use it in melee range, and it can get up higher than that. The Disease Morph does give Major Defile, which can be useful in PvP for sure, but has 0 effect in PvE. So there's really no choice in PvE between the two morphs. I don't think it's the worst thing in the world to have a PvP morph and a PvE morph of a skill, but the Stalking one is also good in PvP, so there really is still a choice there on that side of it. Really, in a perfect world, you'd have reasons to use both morphs in both styles of gameplay. So I'd like to see something in addition to that Major Defile on the stamina costing version, maybe something that would have a bigger impact on PvE, but not overload the skill in PvP scenarios. But as it is right now in PvE, not really any reason to choose Blighted Blast Bones. Let's move on to DKs, Noxious Breath versus Engulfing Flames. Now I do admit Major Breach is a nice AoE debuff with the Noxious morph if it is not already provided, but it is also very generic when comparing to the Engulfing Flames morph. Major Breach is a debuff that comes in a ton of different ways, while the Engulfing debuff is unique specifically to that skill. I think it'd be cool to see the Noxious version get something else unique. One possibility would be ramping damage similar to Venomous Claw, or another would be for it to be more like a counterpart to Engulfing, but for say poison and disease damage instead. This definitely isn't the worst example of morph options we have available, as there still is some use for Noxious Breath, but to me it feels pretty unexciting to pick over its Engulfing counterpart. Alright, let's cover a Templar skill. This will be Vampire's Bane and Reflective Light. These are both pretty underpowered compared to most class skills, but at least Reflective applies to multiple targets. As for Vampire's Bane, comparing just one cast of this to one cast of Puncturing Sweep or Biting Jabs, you get just about the same amount of damage, except those spammables are done in 1 second. Vampire's Bane just feels like it is in a really bad spot and needs something added to it to make it worth slotting. You get more damage right now just having an extra Mages Guild or Fighters Guild passive on your bar than you do from casting this and having to wait a whole 16 seconds to get the damage from it. Maybe they could give this skill a guaranteed chance to proc burning on the initial hit, and maybe a higher chance with each tick to trigger it again. Or another possible route would be to have it stand out further as the longest single target dot in the game, lasting like 20 to 24 seconds or somewhere in that range. Either way, it definitely needs a little something to bring it in line with other class skills. All right, that will be the last skill I go through. Not to say that there aren't other abilities that need to be tweaked, but these are just some of the ones that stood out to me the most upon initially attempting to wrap my head around everything. Thank you so much for watching. I'm feeling really excited about putting builds together for this patch. I think it's going to be a lot of fun. Let me know what you all think about the changes coming, or if there are any other ability morphs that you'd like to see adjusted. And a big thanks to my current Patreon supporters. If you want to see how you can help support to keep these guides coming, there will be a link to my Patreon in the description with options for as little as $3. And a special thanks to Nicholas, Simon, Cougar's Bay and the Cougar City Guild, the Order of War Guild, Iffy, Cantankerous Cat, Shady, BlakeWin816, and my wonderful wife. I'll see y'all in the next one. Bye.